Hello and welcome to another episode of Radio Gore-Press. I'm Sarah. Joining me as always is Phil. How are you doing, Phil?
I am good. I'm glad I'm inside right now.
Yeah. Obviously, depending on when you listen to this podcast, you may already know that the UK is in the grip of some quite gnarly storm weather. So yeah, if you do hear any kind of aberrant noise in the background, it's probably the roof coming off one of our houses.
Here's hoping that the audio cleanup does the trick, but we'll see.
We'll see, yeah. The news has been full of images of the things like the O2 Arena got demolished. Yeah, it's pretty bad. We don't normally get super extreme weather in the UK, so we're not very well equipped to cope with it when it does happen.
Yeah.
As a people and as a country. We're not built for it, man. I moved down south to get away from the cold weather.
How you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right.
Mm-hmm.
Just trucking along. It's not much to say.
Same old.
Yeah, I just got home from the gym and I haven't even had time to have a shower yet.
Gross.
So just be thankful that the medium of podcast doesn't include smell at this point. But I've got a giant coffee in front of me and I've got about 5 pages of notes.
I was going to make a joke about doing the podcast in smell-o-vision, but then...
No, nobody would want that today.
We wouldn't even have vision. It was a podcast.
Yeah, that is not the medium. But yeah, I'm really stoked about today.
Yeah, it's gonna be a cool one. I know this is your recommendation, wasn't it? And I know you've been excited for me to watch it. So
I've been trying to get us to cover this for about 2 years, I think.
Yeah,
I think it was one. Obviously, we touched on the fact that February is no longer considered Women in Horror Month for the reasons stated last week, but we're creatures of habit.
Yep.
So we've not only made February Women in Horror Month, we've made it French Women in Horror Month, more niche than ever. But I'm here for it because, goddamn, French female filmmakers, like, I believe in that supremacy. Let's get to it. So yeah, we covered Raw last time. This week we're covering Revenge. Now, I'm assuming this was a first-time watch for you.
It was, yeah. It's been I've been aware of it for a while.
And at Shudder, we're pushing it really hard for a long time.
Okay. Interesting.
I think I watched it for the first time the year... Well, I don't know. I found conflicting information. Some places saying it came out in 2017, some places saying 2018. I think I first saw it in 2018.
Okay.
Or, I don't know, but I've seen it maybe 4 or 5 times.
That's a very old amount of times, I suppose.
Well, at the moment, I'm averaging once a year, which should give you some indication of how much I like this film. But before we dive in too deep, because we will be, you have no idea the notes. I had a page before I'd even hit play. In fairness, most of my notes are for the first third of the film, but we'll see. Before that, though, do you have a synopsis, Phil?
Sure do. This one's coming at us from Nick Reganis. So thank you, Nick. It's the best one I could find that wasn't too short, so we'll see. Holed up in his secluded minimalist villa in the middle of the desert, the self-centered, arrogant and filthy rich businessman Richard can't wait to spend some time with his foxy extramarital girlfriend, Jen, before his annual hunting get-together. But then, Richard's sleazy friends show up unannounced one day earlier, and what started as a romantic getaway in the vast wilderness will soon take a dangerous turn as alcohol, potent psychotropics, and deadly guns don't mix. Now, sexually abused and left for dead, a severely injured but armed to the teeth Jen plans her bloody retaliation, and no man on earth can stand in her way. How sweet is the ambrosial juice of revenge? I love that last line. I have to throw it in there.
Is that why you chose that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured. Was it a romantic getaway? That's the only part I take issue with.
I think that's fair. It's hardly, roses and candlelight.
I mean, telling your partner that her bum looks like an alien isn't the most romantic
My second
thing.
note is alien.
I love that all of your notes are just like individual words with
I tell you
extreme punctuation.
It's hell to come back to, because I watched this last week. We're recording, for context, we're recording on a Saturday. We usually do Wednesday, but I've been in the midst of a freelance fracas at the moment. And so, yeah, it's kind of interesting going back and reading my notes a week later and trying to decipher what I was even referring to.
This is why you write full sentences, Philip.
But then how can I watch the movie if I'm writing full sentences?
You pause it. That's what I do.
Don't have time to pause it, Sarah.
I did think
busy
that.
man.
You said, "Oh, come off it," as if I'm not busy. We're all busy. Being human means being busy these days. I did think that when you sent me that photo of the close-up of your note that just said "what," and I was just like, how is that going to help him? How is that going to be helpful in the show?
I know exactly what that refers to. We'll get to it.
I'm sure we will. So, this came out in either 2017 or 2018, depending on which source you believe. Directed by, I'm going to butcher this, Coralie Fagia.
Oh, I'd say Fargo.
Oh, no, that's not how I've heard other people say it.
Oh, okay.
No, that's not really a French. EAT. I'm trying to use logical deduction.
I think, yeah.
I don't know.
There's EAUs, oh, right? Like ghetto.
Look, I don't speak French. I don't speak English that well some days. So
it's Coralie. We know Coralie.
You're just gonna have to take what you get with this one. So straight off the bat, it's been done before. However, female-directed rape revenge movies are still a rarity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this kind of is refreshing in that, this is going to sound really fucked up, but it's refreshing in that it's kind of its own beast because it's a rape revenge movie that's fun.
I know what you mean.
Dare I say?
Yeah. I think it's a smart start to film the way they film the opening because it's awash with colour. It's very stylized, and I think
it's very like candy coloured.
Yeah, I think they perhaps lose that kind of stylization pretty quickly. But I think it.
What do you think?
Well, it's not quite as prevalent. Like that opening one, you've got the kind of reflection in the sunglasses. It's like a wash with the same this kind of like color. Like it's very kind of like comic book in its kind of filming approach.
That reflection in the sunglasses shot is cool as fuck.
It's neat, isn't it? But there aren't really, aside from one moment that I could think of, there aren't really many other shots like that that kind of lean into this whole like pop art, comic book style of aesthetic. Well, aesthetic.
Okay, I don't know if I 100% agree with that.
No, if you think of more, let me know. But I that's the one that there's only a handful that jump out at me.
I think it looks incredible considering it was a fairly reasonably modest budget.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so I mean, so how do you feel about this? Obviously, we'll talk about the rape itself shortly.
Mm-hmm.
How did you find? What were the glaring differences to you between films of this ilk that are directed by men and this?
I am actually curious to hear what you think about that because I know like, oh yeah, well, enough about me. What do you think?
Served that ball straight back to me.
Well, no, because I like a lot of the discourse around this movie. The reviews say how it's such a feminist movie, and of course it's directed by a woman, so that would make sense to me. However. And this probably comes more from the fact I haven't seen many rape revenge movies. They're not my favourite thing. Okay. But I struggled to work out what specifically makes this feminist. And I maybe I need to maybe I should have had more of my kind of like film analysis hat on when I was watching it. But it hits a lot of the same beats. It's empower. There's always. I mean, the whole point is that it's a rape revenge movie. There is always that like empowerment of the woman after the fact where she exacts her revenge. So yeah, I was hoping to actually defer to you on that one to kind of give me your thoughts.
To give you a short answer, I 100% think that this is a feminist film.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of like film scholars, for a film to be considered a feminist film, the film basically has to seek to somewhat overtly examine the differences between the genders and look to educate the audience about social inequality between men and women. And I think this does that.
Okay.
Quite well, in fact.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't really know how to expand on that without kind of skipping too far ahead.
Well,
but yes,
maybe we can come back to that then.
I think on the surface of it, it's easy to sort of say, oh, directed by a lady, must be feminist. But I think for much deeper reasons, it is a feminist film. And I think it's really important that it was directed by a woman because there are quite a few nuances that I took notes on that I've not seen in male-directed rape revenge movies, for example.
Okay, because you're like, I know, I'm not meaning to, this sounds really bad, but you're...
Oh, no.
You enjoy rape revenge, like you don't enjoy them, but you... It's hard to say you enjoy, you're a fan of, like, it's a hard...
I definitely, yeah,
You're more familiar with them, I think.
Yes, I'm definitely more familiar with them than you are.
And I'm curious to see what those nuances are.
I have a very complicated relationship with rape revenge movies because I think some of them are absolutely abhorrent and shouldn't exist. However, I don't believe in censorship. I will always make the argument for exploitation cinema. I think there's a place for everything. However, I think it's really important how you frame things. In fact, that's something that I made a note about towards the end of the film. I don't think anything should be off the table. I think a lot of people are quite rightly annoyed when rape is used as a plot device because it's usually done in a really salacious or cheap or exploitative way. And oftentimes it's the catalyst for a man taking revenge on behalf of somebody, which cheapens it even further. But I think much like comedy, for example, you should be able to make jokes about everything, rape included. But it's how you frame them. If you punch down, basically don't punch down.
Yeah.
Like if you're making fun of rape survivors, then you're almost certainly going to hell. You're just a terrible fucking human being.
Yeah.
But you know, there are to use the comedy comparison again. Roxane Gay's TED Talk, for example, really funny, but she talks about her gang rape. Daniel Sloss did a show called X a couple of years ago, which the second half was almost exclusively about his friend's rape and how he should have seen the signs because it was a friend who raped another friend and impacted him quite deeply. But he makes it funny.
Yeah.
Hannah Gadsby's Nanette, she used the first half of the comedy show to really kind of Trojan horse in some really serious shit. But it's possible. You just have to be really fucking clever and you have to pay attention to how you frame the joke ultimately. Yeah. And I think the same is definitely true of rape revenge as a sub-genre. I think when I was younger, I probably made the argument for things like I Spit on Your Grave, whose protagonist is also called Jennifer, interestingly.
Interesting.
I'm wondering if that was on purpose. But yeah, I think it was because just when I was a lot younger, I had been very sheltered and I sought out the most controversial films that I could find and these kind of boundary pushing, taboo breaking movies. And I enjoyed them because it's something that I hadn't seen before and because it was brutal. And I don't know, I just kind of sought that stuff out. The older I get, I have a lot less time for it.
I hear that. Like the amount of films again, similar thing. Like I did seek out these kind of controversial films because it's like, oh, this is amazing. There's so many of these films that I've got that I haven't even opened yet because I've...
Oh, really?
Well, yeah, not because I haven't wanted to, but haven't had the chance to, and then got to a point in my life where I was like, not so fussed about this anymore.
I think most people, when they're younger, say when you start kind of seeking these films out as a teenager, most of us have far fewer cares and responsibilities. And the older you get, it's just like, no, real life is horrible.
Yeah.
I want some escapism.
Yeah. I mean, I've had Cannibal Holocaust on DVD since about 2007. And the first time I watched it was when we covered it last year, whenever it was.
You're welcome. So it's just, what you're saying is you need me to make you watch the horrible stuff.
You're a horrible influence, Sarah.
I must be. Yeah, but I think because there's still a weird place in my heart for this type of film, I really like it when a film like Revenge comes along and does it well. Mm-hmm. And, you know, utilises the female gaze and just does something that feels a lot less seedy.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, it's still a hard... That kind of opening third is still a bit of a hard watch, but actually...
Oh, yeah.
From then, it's a bit of a blast, which, again, is probably a weird thing to say for a revenge movie.
But I think most people who've seen this film and like it would agree with that. I think that's a fair assessment. I think... So straight out the gate, I think one of the main things that makes this more feminist is that the bulk of rape revenge movies dedicate a huge portion, maybe half of the film, sometimes more. Again, not to keep coming back to I Spit on Your Grave. But like the first 2/3 of that film are just this poor woman being brutalized, and you're seeing it happen in real time. And it's just like the camera never deviates away. You are forced to sit through 40 minutes of this poor woman being assaulted repeatedly. And then I think my issue with the ending of that film is that the revenge portion isn't long enough. So I think this is a really good example of how to do it, because the rape itself is primarily off screen. Yeah.
There's a couple of brief shots, but it's mostly implied.
Yeah, and you get a lot of the audio rather than the visual. And it's mercifully brief, but it's enough. That's all you need.
Yeah.
You don't need 45 minutes of that in order for the audience to go, yes, now I understand why she's seeking revenge. 30 seconds, that's plenty. If you've got the ability to empathise, we're there already. And it took watching this film for me to even necessarily formulate that thought, and now I'm livid at every other rape revenge movie that lingered on it too much.
Again, it as I was saying earlier, I haven't seen enough. Had I been familiar enough to... I mean, I've seen A Spit on Your Grave once, and I can't think of many more rape revenge... can't think of many more rape revenge movies that I've watched. But
well, not to keep harping on about Last House on the Left, but that's another one.
True. But either way, even then, I haven't seen them enough to form a idea of the conventions that they have. And I think if that's the case, that they linger too much on the actual not the inciting incident, but the rape itself, then yeah, I can see why that would make this one far more feminist, because there's, like you say, you don't need to for it to be empowering towards the woman. That's the more you focus on that, the more empowering it is. The more she gets her revenge, the more the more
vindicated we as the audience feel as her proxy, kind of.
Exactly, because
she's our proxy, rather.
I think to me at least, rape is still one of those things in film that is very taboo, and I think deservedly so. But more so, you're more likely to see death on screen than you are rape. People actually being killed has almost become a bit of a non-event in certain circles. Obviously, it depends on the genre and the storyline.
If all you watch is rom-coms, then you're going to be horrified.
but even then, and indeed, a character death can be very emotionally impactful if it's executed well. However, horror, death is quite by the numbers now.
Yeah.
And like you say, you don't need to linger on that event. It happens, it's done, you know it's horrific, move on.
Yep. Yeah,
so
exactly.
I can see that. I can see that.
But yeah, this to me kind of rights a lot of the wrongs of the genre in that it heavily focuses on the revenge portion. I mean, hence the title. Apparently, the director took inspiration from Korean revenge movies, so that also might be another reason I love it so much.
Yeah.
Especially in like
Old Boy and
Sympathy. Like I Saw the Devil, I think is another one that she talked about. I read a couple of interviews. Kill Bill was another, which I hadn't necessarily made the connection until I read the interview, and as soon as I read it, I was just like, yeah, of course. That's and Cronenbergian body horror.
Interesting.
But I think that sort of ties in with the Korean revenge aspect, because in a lot of Korean revenge movies, there is some quite absurd gore. Like it's not, what's the word?
Realistic.
I mean, it looks realistic, but it's not very, they always take like the least trodden path. I think it's always quite weird and unique. It's never just like, oh, somebody's had their throat slit, or, you know, it's always weird and taken to the extreme. Yeah. And I can definitely see ripples of that in this film. So prior to the inciting incident, we get to see a little bit of Jen kind of... we don't learn a huge amount of who she is as a person, but she seems kind of up for a laugh, fun, maybe a little bit naive. Yeah,
I was curious. I think I'd be, well, it might, I don't know if it would perhaps missell it, but you remember how and spoilers for this film, in You're Next, you find out that the woman in that is this kind of experienced hunter effectively, which justifies how competent she is. Like, it's a bit, I'd be curious to see what backstory Jen had, because she clearly knows how to deal with things.
Oh, she's smart.
Yeah.
She's definitely smart. She's good at kind of critical thinking. It's funny because even the director herself said sort of post-rape, it does elevate into this almost fantastical story. Like, she wasn't going for realism, obviously, because, I mean, who would even survive the fall? I wouldn't have thought. So we'll get to that.
Okay.
We're not looking for medical accuracy here, you know. But yeah, I did think there were points at which, that I'll talk about later, it did kind of feel a bit more grounded for me, rather than she's just sort of this superhuman badass all of a sudden. But yeah, that's interesting. We'll definitely come back to that. But the something that I really enjoyed and that made me feel deeply uncomfortable was basically kind of the mimicry of the male gaze during that scene where they're all kind of drinking at the pool, and she puts on the music and she starts doing like a little sexy dance and rubbing up against Richard's friend, or Dick, as we'll call him. That guy. It portrays her as promiscuous and scantily clad, but kind of very much backed up by and she's still not asking for it.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
I mean, the fact that his friend was effectively using that excuse and immediately, you know, and portrayed very, very much intentionally as the bad guy. You know, that's quite an everyday argument still to this day.
Oh, you would not believe. But yeah, basically I mean, he literally tells her in no uncertain terms that she led him on, so now she's got to follow through with it, which is just horrific in itself. But yeah, that scene outside by the pool, I really like that, because it's sort of, there were so many lingering shots of her body, but only via close-up. And it was really dehumanizing. because we seldom see her as a whole person. We just see parts of her via the male gaze. So it's reducing her to parts, basically. And the mimicry of the male gaze kind of highlights how absurd that extreme sexualization is. And how dehumanizing it is. And it made me very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I assume that was the point.
I expect so. You know, it's again, it's not seeking to provide titillation to the audience.
Yeah.
Because that in itself kind of goes against the message of the film.
But maybe it is, though.
Okay.
Maybe it is supposed to titillate, and then when what happens, it's supposed to make you feel uncomfortable because you're like, oh, fuck, I'm one of the bad ones. I was being all lecherous. Maybe that's wrong. Like, I don't know. Maybe that was the director's intention. Films are often to hold a mirror up and make you ask difficult questions of yourself, aren't they? So
yeah, for sure.
Who knows? Maybe I'm getting a little bit too deep on what some people would argue is a throwaway exploitation movie. I do think it was quite well timed. And I'm assuming it was just a happy accident because it kind of was released right on the cusp of the Me Too movement gaining traction. And to me, it's almost more impressive that it was helmed by a French woman because from what I've read, women in France are not quite at the stage of their American counterparts in terms of being vocal about allegations of abuse or sexual assault. Okay. They don't feel quite as emboldened. So to me, it's almost kind of more, not impressive, more impactful. Maybe that it was helmed by a French woman. But yeah, I don't know. So I'm going to skip back again. Okay.
Because I
just don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I don't want to skip to the meat of the story before I go through the beginning. So when Richard's friends show up, and she's kind of quite scantily clad in the kitchen,
I think comfortably clad is perhaps like.
I'm not saying she's sort of intended to be sexy. She's just wearing a t-shirt and underwear.
Because she looks comfortable. She's just got out of bed, whatever.
Yeah, she didn't know the people were going to be there. Yeah. It wasn't because she was trying to show off.
Yeah.
But even if she was, doesn't fucking matter. But when they see her for the first time, it's through a pink tinted window.
Okay.
And there's literally an image or a painting of what looks like the Virgin Mary behind her. I'm assuming it's the Virgin Mary. It's some sort of religious iconography of a woman anyway.
Yeah.
She's literally eating an apple, the fruit that tempted Eve in the Garden of Eden. All of these things, I guess, are supposed to symbolize like femininity and fragility and purity, innocence, I guess. Because obviously we later see the apple abandoned on the counter, rotting, being swarmed by pests. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, I made that note myself.
It's funny, I hadn't noticed the religious imagery behind her until this watch.
Well, and there is, it gets a bit more literal later on, and we'll get to it. There is a heavy use of imagery and using that to create meaning. When she cauterizes her wound without getting too far ahead of ourselves. Yeah. Like, there was a conscious decision on the director's part to do what she did. And there was meaning there, so if there is this kind of, let's be honest, heavy-handed metaphor going on there.
Oh, then a lot of it's very heavy-handed, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that was perhaps the most egregious example. But and I think that was clearly, it wasn't just like background noise. It was front and center. Like, here is a thing. Here is imagery. She's a phoenix rising from the ashes. Like, very, very on the nose. Whereas kind of paintings in the background, or there was the later on, right at the end, there was that kind of infomercial or something on the TV that was had a similar vibe. They're kind of background stuff going on, but because they've established that this is a movie that uses symbolism and uses imagery, uses kind of that to provide meaning. to create meaning, then it stands to reason there's more stuff going on there, you know?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So obviously after the party, just going straight back to that, the scene where Richard's friend is kind of sitting on the bed with her and grilling her about why she doesn't want him. That to me was perhaps the most infuriating interaction in the whole film. And actually there aren't that many interactions. It's not a very dialogue heavy film at all.
I don't know if you picked up on this. It was Jen's last line is something like 40 minutes into the film.
Yeah.
From then on, she doesn't say a single thing.
It's
and
crazy.
I didn't pick up on that, but like looking back, I'm like, that's amazing. Like we follow her so closely, and yet she doesn't say a single line.
Yeah, and like testament to the actor as well, because
for sure.
At no point could I not put myself in her shoes and try to feel what she was feeling. She's very expressive. But yeah, I feel like all women have had that experience at some point in their lives of trying to justify no.
How they feel, yeah.
When the no should be sufficient.
It's a complete sentence, yeah.
And it made me so angry. Particularly on rewatch when you know what's going to happen next. And I mean, if you have a vague understanding of what this film's about, I'm pretty sure you can guess what's about to happen anyway. But as we've discussed already, the rape is thankfully short. It's weird because we don't really see anything. We hear a little bit of it, but it's still really fucking brutal. Yeah,
and I think there are films, and back to the whole death analogy, I suppose, like Texas Chainsaw, the original Texas Chainsaw. There's the idea that it's super bloody, super gory, the deaths are horrible, but actually a lot of it is implied. And the same goes for something like Saw, because the first Saw again is it's
pretty tame,
clean, as it were.
Yeah.
And it's all done through implication, and I think that goes to show
the implication.
Don't.
This is the wrong film to be discussing that.
That's not the right joke to crack here. But it goes to show how powerful it is, how powerful just leaving things to the imagination can be.
Oh, far more than showing.
For sure.
Because, I mean, I definitely can conjure up far more horrific things than I've generally seen on screen. One of the exceptions might be the film we watched last week. And stay tuned for next week's minisode, because I have seen Titan in the meantime as well.
I saw. It's gonna be an interesting one.
Jesus. So obviously at this point, what were your feelings about Richard? Because he returns, he finds out what's happened. What was your gut reaction? Because initially he was just like, oh no, how awful. I'll sort you out, accommodation, and I'll transfer you some money and we can make this whole thing better. How did you feel about him at that point?
I didn't like him at the best of times. I think they did a pretty good job of...
He seemed slimy straight off the bat, but I don't think we had personally speaking, I didn't realise the full extent of how awful of a human being he was at this point. It wasn't until, the cliff edge moment. Yeah.
Well, and he doesn't do anything to distance himself from his friends. He just
wants to make it go away.
As a rich person, thinks he can just give money away until his problems disappear. Yeah, which I think is in itself a message that the film's trying to say as well.
Yeah, I actually thought the conversation that he had with the person that's presumably his wife on the phone was quite a nice touch as well, because it just goes to show that these people who live like these, who have these flashy alpha male alter egos, are just faking it. And they're still like the conversation where it was just the banal discussion of like what they were going to have for a meal or something. And it's just like, oh, you absolute fucking dickhead.
Mm-hmm.
You're just like the rest of us. You're just cuntier. I hated him. I think I hated him at that point. Just like, what a scumbag. But then obviously we do get to the cliff edge scene. How did you think that was going to play out?
That was exactly what my note was referring to.
Right, okay.
Because she was cornered. She's cornered, right? She's got three guys all loaded, are like armed to the teeth, approaching her. Well, she's backing off into the cliff.
Outnumbered, outgunned.
And I didn't expect her to go over the edge.
Okay.
That's why it surprised me, because I figured that was a death sentence.
Yeah.
And then particularly when she landed on the kind of branch,
when she gets
impaled. When she gets impaled by the tree, I'm just like, where's this film going to go now?
Because it's not even half over. She's already dead.
I thought that was it. I thought that would be it. I thought she'd be gone. Mm-hmm. And I was like, this is not the film I expected all of a sudden. And so, I was a bit kind of speechless after that.
I think it's really cool because I've never seen anything like that done before. I think at that point you do have to abandon all hope of realism. Yeah. Particularly medical realism, because I'm not convinced that she would have A, survived, B, been able to walk again, C, been able to wield some pretty hefty guns. But, you know, I'm very happy she was in the context of this film. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think the director was definitely onto something when she talked about kind of the second half being a more fantastical wish fulfillment part. Which is kind of what rape revenge movies are, aren't they? Basically wish fulfillment. A girl that I used to know who has been quite vocal about it, so I'm not like spilling anybody's darkest secrets here. But a girl I know who was sexually assaulted absolutely loves rape revenge movies. Yeah. In fact, I believe she'd been raped not once but twice. And one of her favourite films is I Spit on Your Grave. And I think it's really interesting how different people find their catharsis. I think it's really easy to condemn this sort of thing as pure exploitation, just grindhouse nonsense. But if it's helping people who've been through it, then who are you to say it's not valuable, you know? If I hadn't had that first-hand account from her, I perhaps would think a little bit differently about them. Yeah. But I find it really interesting. Like this film particularly, it really kind of ramps up the wish fulfillment element. And I do wonder if it is kind of cathartic for people who've been through that.
I mean, it seems like it is. It certainly is.
Yeah, who've been through what happens in the first third. I don't mean who have hunted down their assailants. I'm pretty sure that's not very common.
Yeah, and I think that's perhaps why this is more feminist, like you say, because it focuses, as we've established, for more attention on the revenge. And that's really what we want. That's what the audience wants.
Obviously, we can't speak on behalf of everyone, but I would imagine that's what more people are interested in. I can't imagine who would be like, no, I'm only here for the rape portion.
Yeah, exactly.
I turn it off after that, you know. I mean, firstly, get therapy. Right. Secondly, please don't come anywhere near me. You scare me. But yeah, so I think that was a really smart move, and it really shocks me that it hadn't been done more before. But then I guess the bulk of these films are directed by men, and if it's not something they've experienced or had conversations with women that they know who've experienced it, or, you know, done the research, it is just going to be salacious. It is going to be exploitative. Which again, I'm not condemning. Yeah. I am not the moral arbiter of film. That's not what I'm here to do. Yeah, so she becomes MacGyver. She's reborn as MacGyver at this point and can solve any problem with a beer can and a lighter, apparently.
As we've established.
But how the fuck, when it becomes obvious that she's still alive, how the fuck did you think she was going to get out of that?
I had no idea. Like I said, I was convinced she was dead. I think that was it. And I was like, where is this film going? Because she's clearly not going to survive this. And she did. But like you said, I think it's a lot to do with wish fulfillment rather than trying to maintain any semblance of realism. I think all bets are off at that point. And I was just like, I'm going to enjoy this film for what it is.
Yeah. I kind of love that, though. I love films that I can't predict. If I'm just like, do you know what? I've got no idea where this is going.
Yeah.
At that point, I'm like fully checked in.
Yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, that's why that note just reads, what?
What?
Because, again, just no idea, no clue where it was going.
Yeah.
It was great.
I thought, I love the fact that she actually started to show some smarts, some kind of problem solving, all of the things I'm no good at. I would have died on that tree. I can absolutely attest to that. But yeah, I think beyond that, it becomes a tad more formulaic, perhaps. But I think it still has some kind of cool cards up its sleeve. I think the first death is sublimely poetic. Because obviously the first person she finds, I can't even remember the guy's name, French Kyle Gass. She finds that guy, has a bit of a tussle, ends up stabbing him in his eyes, which I love because the guy who was basically the voyeur just stood there and watched and then walked away. You're as absolutely as complicit. I can't think straight. I'm so angry. And I was trying to think of insults and everything was too rude. But I thought that was incredibly poetic.
Yeah. It's a fair point. I hadn't picked up on that. I mean, I want to give some love to, because before she sets out on her revenge, she cauterizes the wound, right? That's beforehand, right? Or am I mixing?
No. She kills him first
Then,
before she.
Okay, cool.
And then I think she steals his buggy, and then she goes to the cave.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. No, I want to give some love to that that whole scene where she's A, set him in the cave, and B, cauterizing the wound, because above all, that just the wide shot of the cave itself, and she's just sat there in front of the fire, is beautiful. Like, I love that shot. Some
of the cinematography is surprisingly excellent in this film. I think that's another thing that really elevates it. It looks stunning.
Yeah, for sure. But just again, unrealistic, but I think this is the other moment that I was kind of referring to, where it's obviously very stylized.
I'm so sorry if you can hear me drinking. I just put far too much coffee in my mouth.
I was hoping to ride it out, but you had to mention this.
Sorry, could you hear me gulping? That was disgusting. Maybe we'll edit that out.
Edited that out, but now we have no choice but to leave it in for context.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the fact that she kind of gets this can of beer and cauterizes the wound, and it leaves the wound is entirely clean. It was just like entirely healed. Yeah. Anyway, but more importantly, the imagery of the phoenix from the beer can itself gets like kind of tattooed on her effectively.
Do you know what annoys me about that?
What?
It would have been mirrored. The writing would have been mirrored.
You are very, very right.
But again, we're not looking for realism.
Yeah, I mean,
the pedant in me was just like, well, that wouldn't happen.
I'm not as familiar with, again, another subgenre I'm not as familiar with, but it felt a little bit grindhousey from then on.
Yeah, I would agree.
It exists in this kind of very stylized, very larger than life world. You know, she's still
hyper-violent.
She's still bombing around in effectively her underwear. Like, she's got
what choice has she got?
Shorts and a crop top. Yeah, but it's a directorial choice to like leave her in that. I mean, she could have been better dressed when she went off the cliff, for example. But that's a horrible word to use. Better dressed. What am I?
She just wasn't thinking.
She could have had more clothes on. But the point is, she kind of bombed. It's very kind of like.
So you think it would have been more realistic if she'd had like some sort of Clinton-esque pantsuit on as she went over the cliff?
Exactly.
Okay.
No, I think it was just very evocative of this type of imagery you'd see in a grindhouse movie, like a woman, kind of arms to the teeth, to use that term again. And in kind of very, very little clothing. Mm-hmm. Very kind of like the whole Planet Terror.
It's definitely a kind of grindhousey exploitation movie throwback, yeah.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting is that she's still, unlike most rape revenge movies, she's never the most naked person in this film. Richard has 2 scenes in which he's completely full frontal. She doesn't. I think that's really interesting.
Very true, yeah.
You never see that in these movies. Because obviously, the less clothing you're wearing, the more vulnerable you appear.
And he's flat out naked at the end of it.
He's very naked at the end of this film. But we get, he hangs dong at the start as well. 15 minutes in, we see full frontal nudity. That never happens.
Amazing.
More of this, please. This is what the feminists want. This is what we mean by equality. Yes. I'm really on my soapbox at the moment. We'll talk more about this in next week's minisode, but the King's Man, Matthew Vaughan's misogyny, will definitely, I'm going to chew that man out next week. But ever since that, I'm really on a soapbox, so this is a bad week to cover this film. Or maybe that makes it the best week.
Get it all out. It's going to be really like a very deflated show, minisode, because all of your
my feminist
irritation will be
my well of feminist rage runs very deep, Philip. I'm not going to run out anytime soon, trust me. I do think I agree with that the cave scene is very beautifully filmed. It's one of the few scenes that I do have a couple issues with, though.
Okay.
Primarily that I think I really hate that it was all a dream trope. It's one of my least favourite tropes in film. And it happens
multiple times as well.
It's super overused.
Yeah.
By the second or third time, I was just like, oh, we get it. I'm done. I think the first one was really cool.
Yeah.
And then just each subsequent time, it was like the start of Scream 4. It's like, we get it. Stop. Take their toys away. They've had enough now. But yeah, that's one of the few problems I have with this film.
I think there's justification at least, because obviously she's taken the peyote. Was it peyote to?
I think so.
To kind of numb the pain, because it's already been established that this guy chopped his own leg off or something because he couldn't feel the pain after taking some. So
sounds great.
she was already high, and also dealing with having been impaled and the trauma she's been through. I think having a few kind of nightmare moments is justified. I think had she not been had she not been on anything, then it would have felt a bit silly and a bit of a waste of time almost. But I think it adds to this kind of fever dream effect they were going for.
And honestly, I think if you've been through what she's been through, tripping balls on some hardcore psychedelics is probably best case scenario at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did think the self-surgery was just all right, we see you, Coralie, but I don't think you went to medical school. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Not like the doctor in Body Count. She didn't go to doctor school and get the white coat.
the fact that there was no scarring, it was literally just cauterize the wound, the skin is fully healed, and there's a tattoo of a phoenix on her.
I'm sorry, it's so cool.
Oh, don't get me wrong, I love it. But again,
it is very cheesy.
It points to that very kind of hyper real, very silly aesthetic that a lot of grindhouse movies have.
Yeah, and you're right in saying that symbolism is definitely the most heavy-handed in the film.
I was like, oh, a phoenix, I wonder what phoenixes are famous for.
Being in Harry Potter books? I don't know. But yeah, that was a really cool scene, and just kind of a pivotal moment for her as well.
Mm.
And at that point, she becomes a bit more single-minded, a bit more ruthless. She doesn't just want to survive. She wants to take those fuckers down.
Mm.
And it's funny because, as you brought up earlier, she doesn't utter a single line, but that switch is very obvious. Which I think is really testament to good filmmaking.
And good acting.
And good acting, definitely.
To convey emotion without a single word uttered.
Yeah.
All you've got is the control over your own body in order to portray, a range of emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that's pretty difficult to do. Well, at least.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. One of my only other examples of that is Ms. 45, which is also a rape revenge movie.
Oh, okay, I haven't seen that one.
It's about a mute seamstress. It's actually really good. It's definitely one of the better ones. I guess Sally Hawkins in The Shape of Water.
Oh, yeah.
It's another really good example.
Yeah. She was really good in that.
Yeah, she's just fucking adorable.
Isn't she great? I love. Oh no! Don't get me started. Don't get to talk about.
Maybe we should cover that on a show.
I'm game.
Is that horror enough?
It's dark fantasy. It counts.
Okay. We'll see. We'll put it to the people. We'll do a poll. So the second killing, how do you feel about that? Which
was, I was curious to see which order she'd go.
Well, this is it. Because Richard was obviously more of a primary character.
Yeah, there's the emotional abuse, and there's the physical abuse, and
I think maybe if she'd got an emotional connection to Richard, that would feel like the bigger betrayal.
Yeah.
So in that respect, it does make the most sense. But I don't know, because he was the one who pushed her off the cliff as well.
True.
Like he was the one who left her for dead.
True.
Ultimately.
Yeah, that's true. I think because in my head it was the rape that was the thing that sparked this whole revenge thing she had going on. I wasn't sure because obviously it was Stanley who sparked that whole thing. Mm-hmm. Like had Stanley not been there, she would have been fine. But
well, you would hope.
You would
Who knows?
Yeah. He's certainly the one that raped her effectively. Yeah. Whereas, like we said, Richard is the one who has the emotional connection to her and is complicit in it all as well. Mm-hmm. So I was curious to see where they go with it. In terms of the actual death, I thought it was. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed all of them. Really,
I enjoyed how drawn out it was.
Yeah,
because again, in terms of like the heavy-handed metaphors, that was the real sort of the hunters are becoming the hunted.
Yeah. Yeah,
and it really did feel like she was stalking him,
relying on seeing the glint in the mirror when he had it. And it was using a lot of the tropes that you'd find in action films like this.
Yeah,
to kind of portray like an expert hunter, chasing down their prey.
Which is funny actually, because the director has kind of gone on record to say that she didn't intend to make a horror film. She doesn't really see it as a horror film. So it makes sense that she would adopt tropes from action movies or thrillers.
Yeah, I think I see that. It all depends on how you classify horror, but I
think it is a horror film. I think she's wrong on that.
It's horrific
in that regard.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, I suppose.
But in the same way that you could argue that Raw isn't a horror film as well. Not to keep coming back to that, but I think there is a strong argument for like new age French extremity, albeit the tail end of it at this point, that they do kind of border many genres rather than just being like, this is a horror film.
I think that makes sense though. You often find with kind of waves of specific genres being popular, that they get steadily more complex as they progress. Like you think about there was you go through. I mean, you basically go through phases. I think if memory serves, what happens is you have the film that becomes the genre that becomes popular, and then you get meta films that comment on that genre itself, and then you get kind of like post genre versions of them where they're very, very like sensible, very not sensible, very grounded, very rooted, very dark and gritty. Still the same genre, but portrayed in different ways.
Yeah,
I think
sometimes it can even circle back around.
Oh, for sure, yeah. You know, I think that was basically what happened with westerns. Like, so we don't see Western movies anymore because that kind of genre pretty much died, but it was super popular at one time, and it went through this whole thing where they were very straight, they were played entirely straight, and they got steadily more silly, and then you had
there was a real resurgence in the late 80s and 90s of more serious ones, but there were some that kind of really towed the line between serious and silly. And then they sort of, like you say, faded into obscurity again.
Yeah, and it's not an exact science. You do find that it varies from genre to genre, but you that's why Logan was released. Logan came out as a result of how silly superhero movies were getting, and it was very grounded. It was very, in inverted commas, realistic. It was a lot more realistic than certainly superhero movies were.
I guess Joker as well.
Yeah. Oh, for sure, yeah. But we can clearly see the superhero genre hasn't died, but it still follows that same path, right? It just didn't fade off quite as much as Westerns did.
I don't think Disney are suffering. I think they're doing just fine, Phil. But I definitely see what you're saying.
It wouldn't surprise me that these kind of like French extremist films are getting more complex because
it's just a natural progression of the subgenre.
Yeah, otherwise they're just kind of retreading old ground.
Yeah, they just risk stagnating.
Exactly.
Treading water. Yeah, that's really interesting. Did you say this guy was called Stanley? I'm terrible at names.
Stanley, Dimitri, and Richard.
Okay, Stanley.
Are our three antagonists.
They're all detestable. I do hate Stanley the most, I think.
I say like is a bad word to use, but the fact that they all are complicit in their own ways or like involved in their own ways, it's not like they all did the same thing. You know, kind of Stanley was the one who raped her. Dimitri was the one who
allowed it to
happen. And Richard was the one who tried to cover it up.
Yeah.
And, they all played their part in very different ways. And I think
it's kind of it's sort of like representing a microcosm of the, in inverted quotes, the boys' club.
Yeah.
And the lengths that they'll go to screw over women in order to protect themselves and one another because they feel threatened. They don't want their power taken away. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Sometimes I say smart things. It's very rare.
We cobble stuff together sooner or later, I'm sure. But yeah, sorry.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, did you find the deaths to be adequate retribution?
Yes,
they were satisfying. Weren't they?
Yeah. I think the time spent on them was warranted each. Like kind of like we said, kind of Stanley's feels a lot more drawn out. That makes sense, and Richard's even more so because and it shows the thoughts gone into it to determine the rise in tension and the rise in actual like drama. Because if they're all too much or too little, then they'd either feel underwhelming or overwhelming.
It's funny, isn't it? Because this film is not too far off being 2 hours long, but it really didn't feel like it. Even on rewatches, but not even a great deal happens, and there are some lulls, but it never felt boring. At any point, I never felt like it dragged.
No, for sure, and I think there was always movement. That's why I think had and I don't know what situation would have called for it, but had Jen actually had dialogue post that last line or like stopped and spoke to someone, then it probably would have dragged, but there's just always something happening, whether it's Jen looking like hunting someone down or trying to, deal with her wounds, or the guys talking to each other, trying to work out if they're safe, trying to track her down. They're always doing something, and I think that's the thing that keeps it moving. That's the thing that keeps the momentum going, even if more happens in some scenes than others.
Do you know what's really weird? This is going to sound like a very strange thing to say, given the film we're talking about. It's interesting. It's interesting to me that French filmmakers, European filmmakers, show quite a lot more restraint than their American counterparts.
Mm.
And I mean that in a very specific way, because this is not a film that shows a great deal of restraint. So that's what I mean. It's going to sound weird. But I feel like had this been an American film, they would have shoehorned in some more dialogue for Jen. Mm. I can't help but feel like there might have been narration, or she'd have been like wisecracking before, like prior to killing the men. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it actually shows an awful lot of restraint and confidence in your own filmmaking to strip the latter half of almost all dialogue and just let the action speak for itself.
Yeah, I think no, you're right. Like it shows, and it shows a skill of filmmaking, like a level of filmmaking, because I didn't notice it. I think you hear our character doesn't speak for the entire movie, and you perhaps associate that with with quite a kind of a quiet film or an introspective film.
Yeah.
Because you don't expect these big action movies to have no dialogue.
Yeah, this is far from understated. So at this point, she's killed Stanley. Mm-hmm. After he spent what felt like 15 minutes trying to dig some glass out of his foot.
Oh my God. I was like, just with how...
That was genuinely horrifying.
I had images, and it was just... I don't know if it was because it's just the type of movie it is. I had images of him accidentally just pulling parts of his feet off, like reaching in and like getting hold of some like tendon or muscle or something and just ripping at that, because he had so much of a struggle trying to get this glass out of his
that was in there.
I was like, I think I turned away. Just like, I can't watch this.
Still less gross than Achilles tendon stuff. Still less wincy. But coming back to what I said earlier about it not being 100% fantasy, there are moments that ground it. And I think just before she shoots him for the first time is a really good example of that, because she clearly never wielded that kind of gun before.
Yeah.
And didn't know to expect that level of kickback, because she's quite a slight woman. So I thought that was quite a nice touch. She's not just this indestructible Terminator-like badass. She's still human. She's learning as she goes. But I thought that was quite a nice touch when the kickback from the gun floored her. Deafened her for a minute.
Yeah. And when he got injured as well, like all of a sudden you could see the effort he exerted to actually lift up the gun because he was just so injured. Like, I think that was quite surprising, and it was a great choice of direction as well, because I think you really get a sense of how hurt he is.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely, it toes the line between fantasy and realism quite well, I think. So when Jen, I mean, I don't know what Richard thought he was doing. He just like fucked off back to his house. It's just like, oh, I guess everyone's dead. I'm going to go home and take a shower because why not? So he's fully naked again.
I think he'd called his helicopter friend.
Yeah,
and his so I presume he's trying to clean himself up to.
I want a helicopter friend. Maybe not one that gives me peyote though.
Just someone who hovers around you a lot.
Yeah.
Like helicopter parents.
See what you did.
Helicopter parents are a thing. Don't.
I know.
Not my bad joke. Don't worry.
Kind of is. Just own it though.
Okay.
But yeah, so she makes her way back to the house, and one thing I thought was really interesting and cannot possibly be an accident. The first time we see her is through the pink panel of glass. Mm-hmm. When she sees him, it's through the blue panel of glass.
Interesting.
And I
didn't
think
pick up on that.
Like the two most heavily gendered colours in the spectrum.
Yeah.
It's not a fucking accident. And I think it's quite a neat somewhat subtle way of sort of signifying the shoe is on the other foot now. That, you know, he's no longer the one with the power. Neither of them are wearing the trousers.
Very visibly so.
But she is wearing the proverbial trousers.
She's wearing things that are closer to trousers than he is.
Do you know what? I think it's a really neat choice that he was completely stark naked, because, I mean, there is no easier way to make somebody look super vulnerable. Especially if your genitalia is on the outside.
Yeah.
Because the potential there for accident is much higher, I'm guessing. I don't know. I think the first time I watched this film, I felt like that chase sequence went on a little bit too long. And on rewatches, I changed my mind and enjoyed it for what it was. How did you feel about that?
Yeah, I think there's it's not comedy per se, but the fact they're just running around,
ridiculous.
They're running around in a circle, just gradually slipping on more and more blood. There's something light-hearted about it, or at least it's.
If you're a fucked up horror fan, it's lighthearted. Yeah,
it's hard to describe exactly how I feel, because I can't think of the word, but it's not funny. I wasn't laughing.
No, it's just ludicrous.
I guess that's the thing. It's just
just really absurd. But I like much of the film, I think, and I think it's fair to say it's funny and fun.
Fun. I wouldn't say it's necessarily funny, but it's fun.
Yeah. It's enjoyable because it's kind of building up to him getting his comeuppance, which we've waited the whole film for by that point. So I think to have it be over too quickly wouldn't have felt like she'd been vindicated enough. So when I say it's drawn out, that sounds like a negative, and I don't mean it that way, but I think it needed to be a little bit drawn out to build up to the satisfying ending.
Yeah,
you know?
for sure. Because I think they play with the dynamics as well. With it's not like Jen always has the upper hand. She's often just as much at risk as he is, and like that you need that in order to feel like her victory is justified, and it was worth it. Because otherwise, if she just storms in and just shoots him, it's kind of underwhelming, and yeah.
And on that note, my final note in my notebook is just Jen for president.
Yeah,
fair. And that's where I want to end this.
I thought there was. I'm almost disappointed there wasn't, because I think it would have been a perfect way to have a callback. So there was I can't remember when it showed up, but there was a gag about how one of the characters was in their car and they hadn't strapped their seatbelt in.
Oh yeah,
it was just
chime.
Yeah, and I was fully expecting him to be alone in his car because they brought it back.
Yeah,
I was like, there's going to be something there, and they brought it back, and he's there in his car with the seatbelt chime going off. I fully expected him to put his seatbelt on and the chime to keep going, and Jen to just like explode from the back seat with like a knife or something. And I was a bit disappointed that they didn't, because that seemed like the perfect setup for a setup and payoff for kind of a thing they were going to do. But I think that kind of just about wraps up my notes as well.
Okay, cool.
I think that the weird cuts to the lizard they had were slightly odd.
Okay.
Where I think Jen is about to shoot Stanley, and through the sight she just gets flashes of like this lizard that pops up instead over his face, and that was a bit out of left field. Like I understand what they're doing, because it was that there was clearly like mannerisms that he adopted that were very lizard like.
Yeah,
it just
maybe she was still high.
Probably.
She's just hallucinating for the rest of the movie.
It just felt a bit weird, or maybe there was a better way of doing it. They could have either done it better or not done it at all. But I felt like that was just a personal preference anyway. But no, that like just about kind of wraps up all of my notes as well. So yeah.
Okay, so how would you summarise Would you recommend this film to anybody? Would you watch it again?
I would watch it again.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've had my eyes opened to the feminist aspect.
Okay, good.
And I'm
my job here is done.
A bit annoyed at myself for not having picked up on them because I do consider myself a feminist. But I think, again, comes down to not being as familiar with the genre. So I don't know what she had changed to make it more of a feminist movie from the conventions of rape revenge movies as a whole. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like all the things you've spoken about just, perfectly do illustrate that. So I think I would, because it's not as much of a hard watch as other rape revenge movies.
Oh, not even a little bit.
A lot of them are hard to sell because it's like, like Irreversible, for example. Oh yeah, there's a quarter of an hour rape scene.
And that's towards the end.
Yeah. Like
that's the worst.
I can't say I remember how well that was critically received.
Oh, Irreversible was very well critically received.
I was going to say, I'd imagine so, but that's a hard sell to someone. It's like, it's a really good film. Yeah. You do have to sit through a quarter of an hour rape sequence, but like this is a lot easier to actually like recommend to someone, because yes, it's a hard watch for that minute that it happens, or 5 minutes, whatever it is, but the rest of the film is just fun and just engaging, and you do feel so vindicated with Jen's revenge.
Arguably, you could tell people that Irreversible has a happy ending and you wouldn't be lying.
It's true.
You just don't tell them that the film moves in reverse.
Yeah, and I think
it ends with this very happy couple in a field. Yeah. It's fine.
That's actually, like, those two are the only things that there's three scenes I remember in Irreversible: the end scene in the field, the rape, and the fire extinguishing
at the
sequence.
Very beginning. Yeah. Holy shit!
And it's interesting because there's. Anyway, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, we're not covering that one. I'm sorry, I veto.
I'm okay with that. We've already done one Gaspar Noé film.
Oh, you haven't? You got scot-free.
We as a platform have already covered.
I'm really stoked you like this film. I don't know. Again, maybe liked is a weird descriptor. I like this film a lot. I really dig it. I think. As a thriller, it's excellent. As a horror film, it's excellent. As a feminist film, it's excellent. It's just like a really solid 4 stars out of 5 for me. And I'll watch it again next year. Apparently, yearly viewing of it.
Come, not Women in Horror Month next year.
Yeah. Oh, we're not covering it every year. I can't find new things to say about it every time. I think that wraps us up on that. So thank you for listening. If you made it this far, we appreciate you. If you are a patron, I still don't know.
If you are from Patreon,
not if you work for them. If you are pledged to our Patreon,
there we go.
Double thank you. To steal a gimmick from Curtis Connor. If you pledge to the Patreon, you get thanked twice. So it's more than worth it. We're on all the social medias, and by that I mean Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We don't acknowledge the others. TikTok can get fucked. But if you can find us at Radio Ghoul Press. And I think that's it. We've got another show in a fortnight. I'm very excited about that one too. But yeah, if you want to hear about how much I hate Matthew Vaughn or what I thought of Titan, consider pledging the Patreon, because next week's mini-sode is bound to be a doozy.
Fingers crossed, you'll hear about.
Oh, not more D&D.
No, I mean I will have watched more of it, but okay. So last Saturday, I introduced Mon and our friend to a certain Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, and the kind of 10 minutes they saw, they loved.
They only watched 10 minutes.
I can't remember what the context was. We were wrapping up the night. Okay. I think it was we'd watched something that kind of like had a aesthetic that was like a vintage aesthetic, like from Garth Marenghi. Like, well, if you like that, you should watch. And so we watched a bit of Garth Marenghi and a bit of Look Around You, and
okay,
they went down very well. So I think that's going to be tonight's watch, is just season 1 of the only season of Garth Marenghi.
Yeah. Oh. Season. That's it.
See. That's it.
Just the one. 6 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the worst thing that's ever happened to me, I think. The fact that there's only 6 episodes of Garth Marenghi. On that note, nobody's listening. Goodbye. Stay spooky.
Bye-bye.
We love you.